When Big Shaq walked into a luxury jet dealership, the sales staff assumed he was a nobody, just another guy wasting their time. They refused to take him seriously, dismissing him with condescending smirks and backhanded insults. But what they didn't know? Shaq wasn't just there to buy a jet. He was about to buy their entire competition. What happens next will leave everyone speechless. Watch as power shifts, arrogance crumbles, and the ultimate revenge unfolds. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The glass doors of Vanguard private jets slid open with a soft hiss as Big Shaq stepped inside. The air smelled of money, polished leather, imported coffee, and the faint metallic tang of fresh aircraft fuel drifting in from the private runway outside. He had been in places like this before. High-end, exclusive, a playground for billionaires. But there was something else in the air today, something more familiar. Judgment. Shaq didn't look like the average client here. Dressed in a crisp black hoodie, designer jeans, and fresh white sneakers, he was a stark contrast to the usual clientele. Men in tailored suits, Rolexes flashing under showroom lights. He didn't carry an assistant, an advisor, or an over-eager accountant whispering financial figures in his ear. He walked in alone, and that was enough for people to assume he didn't belong. From the moment he entered, the energy in the room shifted. The sales team, who had been engaged in casual conversation, suddenly grew stiff. A few exchanged quick glances, subtle but obvious. Whispers followed. At the front desk, a receptionist, thin, blonde, and exuding forced politeness, gave him a once-over, barely hiding her skepticism. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, emphasizing "sir" in a way that suggested she already doubted he could afford even the cheapest pre-owned aircraft on their lot. Shaq wasn't new to this. He had grown up being underestimated. He had spent years fighting for his place in rooms where no one wanted him, and now, he owned rooms like these. But still, the game never changed. "I'm here to buy a jet," Shaq said smoothly, flashing a polite smile. The receptionist's smile tightened, a beat of silence. Then she tapped something into her computer as if confirming whether he was serious. Meanwhile, just behind Shaq, a middle-aged white man in a navy suit entered. He barely stepped through the door before a salesman rushed forward, grinning. "Mr. Davenport, welcome back." Shaq didn't miss the difference. While he stood waiting for basic assistance, Davenport was instantly greeted with warmth, enthusiasm, and priority treatment. Not even subtle. That's when Bradley Carter walked in. Late 40s, slicked back salt and pepper hair. A suit so sharp it looked like it could cut through steel. He carried himself like a man who believed he ran the place, and in many ways, he did. Bradley was Vanguard's top salesman, known for catering to the ultra-rich. He had sold jets to tech billionaires, oil magnates, and A-list celebrities. The moment he saw Shaq standing at the front desk, his expression barely concealed a smirk. He sauntered over, slipping his hands into his pockets as he looked Shaq up and down, not in recognition, but in quiet dismissal. "You lost, buddy?" Bradley asked, mocking politeness. Shaq's jaw tensed. This wasn't a question. This was a power move. "Nope," Shaq replied easily. "Looking to buy a jet." Bradley chuckled under his breath, shaking his head slightly. A practiced move. The kind of laugh you give when you think someone doesn't know their place. "Sure you are," he muttered, barely hiding his amusement. Then, turning to the receptionist, he added, "Let's not waste his time. Or ours." The message was clear. Shaq wasn't worth their time. Shaq kept his cool. He knew how these situations played out. If he reacted with anger, they'd write him off as aggressive. If he pushed too hard, they'd question whether he was really serious about buying. So, he did what he did best. He let them dig their own grave. Bradley exhaled dramatically, as if indulging Shaq in some silly fantasy. "All right," he said. "Follow me." He didn't lead Shaq to the VIP section where luxury jets were displayed. Instead, he walked him toward the back, past the sleek new models, past the premium inventory. Shaq didn't say a word, just observed. They stopped in front of an older pre-owned jet, its paint slightly faded, the interior not nearly as pristine as the others. Bradley patted the aircraft's side. Now this, he said smugly, is more in your price range. Shaq exhaled slowly. Not because he was surprised, but because deep down he had hoped, just for once, things would be different. But no, they never were. Bradley crossed his arms, smirking. So, you want to hear about financing options? Maybe leasing instead? Shaq tilted his head, playing along. And what about those? He motioned toward the high-end section, where the real jets were. Bradley's smirk deepened. Oh, those? He let out a short laugh. Yeah, those start at about 60 million. I think we should keep it realistic. Shaq's hands curled into fists inside his hoodie pocket. 60 million. The irony? Shaq could write a check right now and buy 3 of them. But they didn't know that. And that's exactly why they were about to lose everything. Just then, another salesman, Daniel Reese, approached. Younger, early 30s, genuine in his approach. He had been watching from a distance, his discomfort growing. Daniel wasn't like Bradley. He had seen Shaq's face before, knew exactly who he was, and he knew Bradley had just made a colossal mistake. Excuse me, Daniel interrupted, offering Shaq his hand. Would you like a proper tour, sir? Bradley turned sharply, eyes narrowing. We're fine, Daniel. But Daniel didn't back down. No, I don't think we are. The tension was thick. Other customers were now noticing the scene. Whispers started. Bradley, sensing control slipping, turned back to Shaq. Look, we don't usually... Shaq held up a hand. Enough. He glanced at his watch. It was time. He pulled out his phone and sent a single text. Within minutes, the atmosphere in the showroom would change. Because while Bradley and the others saw him as just another outsider trying to flex, they had no idea who they were actually dealing with. They would soon find out. And by then, it would be too late. Shaq knew the moment was coming. The moment when they would try to put him in his place. It always came. Bradley Carter leaned against a glossy white desk, his smirk dripping with arrogance. He didn't even pretend to take Shaq seriously. The way he looked at him, the way his eyes flickered with casual dismissal, it was familiar. Shaq had been underestimated before, and every time, it ended the same way, with the other person regretting it. So, Bradley said, dragging out the word, his tone laced with fake politeness. You're looking to buy a jet? Shaq kept his posture relaxed, hands in his hoodie pockets. That's right. Bradley exhaled through his nose like he was holding back a laugh. Uh-huh. His eyes scanned Shaq's outfit again, the designer hoodie, the sneakers. Not a suit, not a Rolex. Wrong uniform. Well, Bradley continued, pushing off the desk, we've got a few options, but just so we're not wasting time, why don't I show you something reasonable? Shaq arched an eyebrow. Reasonable. Bradley nodded, giving him that condescending customer service smile. Yeah, we have a great selection of pre-owned jets, and if that's still a bit much, we also have a rental program. Lots of guys prefer that, especially when they're just starting out. Just starting out. Shaq bit back a smirk. This guy had no idea who he was talking to. A few feet away, the wealthy businessman, Mr. Davenport, was still being treated like royalty. Champagne, red carpet service, multiple salesmen fawning over his every question. Meanwhile, Shaq was being directed toward the used lot. Bradley was talking fast, trying to move him along, like he wanted Shaq out of the showroom before someone important saw him standing there. Shaq turned slightly, glancing around. Customers were watching. Employees were whispering. Bradley noticed too. That's why he decided to humiliate him one last time, to make sure Shaq got the message. You understand, right? Bradley said, his voice carrying. Jets aren't exactly bought with rapper money. A chuckle. Not just from Bradley, from a few other customers nearby. That was it. The room expected Shaq to be embarrassed, expected him to scowl, maybe get angry, maybe storm out. But instead, Shaq smiled. And when Shaq smiled, it wasn't a reaction. It was a warning. Because now, it wasn't about a jet anymore. It was about teaching them a lesson. And Shaq always won. Shaq could have walked out. He could have let the humiliation roll off his back like he had so many times before. But that wasn't going to happen today. Not here. Not with Bradley. Because Bradley wasn't just some arrogant salesman. He was a symbol. A walking, talking representation of every smug, dismissive person who had ever underestimated Shaq. And Shaq had built an empire off proving people like him wrong. So instead of leaving, he stayed. And he played along. Shaq leaned against the counter, acting as if he were truly considering Bradley's offer. Pre-owned, huh? He mused, stroking his chin like a man deep in thought. That's interesting. Bradley, emboldened by Shaq's apparent uncertainty, smirked and ran with it. Yeah, he said, puffing out his chest. Renting or going pre-owned is usually the best move for, well, people who aren't used to this level of investment. Shaq kept a straight face. Makes sense. I mean, jets must be expensive to maintain, right? Bradley's smirk widened. Oh, absolutely. Fuel costs, hangar fees, pilot contracts. It's not just about buying one, it's about keeping it in the air. Shaq nodded thoughtfully. And what about, cup holders? Bradley blinked. What? Shaq shrugged. Cup holders. Do they come standard or is that extra, like in a car? Bradley chuckled, shaking his head as if Shaq was proving his own ignorance. Well, I mean, that's really not the kind of thing a serious buyer asks, but... Or what about windshield wipers? Shaq interrupted, now tapping his chin. You ever get jets where the wipers don't work? Or do they all wipe at the same speed? Bradley faltered. And turbulence. Shaq continued, his expression dead serious. If I buy a jet, do I get, less turbulence? Or is that a subscription thing? Bradley blinked. Daniel, a junior salesman standing nearby, snorted. He was starting to catch on. But Bradley, he was still convinced he was the smartest guy in the room. Shaq let Bradley run his mouth for another 5 minutes, listening as the man dug his own grave, talking in circles, explaining things he barely understood himself. Then, when the moment was perfect, Shaq dropped the hammer. I hear you, Shaq said casually, pulling out his phone. But I don't like making big decisions on my own. Let me check something. Bradley raised an eyebrow, watching as Shaq scrolled through his phone, his thumbs moving deliberately. Then, Shaq turned the screen toward him. A number flashed across it. A multi-million-dollar transfer approval. Shaq's eyes locked onto Bradley's. So, if I wanted to buy one of your jets outright, say today, what's the process? The entire showroom went silent. Bradley's face drained of color. Daniel's eyes widened. Even the receptionist at the front desk froze mid-typing. Shaq could practically hear the gears grinding in Bradley's head. This wasn't a random guy wasting time. This was a man who could buy this place 10 times over. But Bradley wasn't ready to give up. He forced a laugh, trying to recover. Well, you see, purchasing a jet is a complex process. It's not just about... You mean it's not as easy as buying a used Honda? Shaq interrupted smoothly. Bradley swallowed hard. Just then, Daniel, who had been standing off to the side watching Bradley self-destruct, took a step forward. Mr. Shaq, he said, his voice calm, professional. If you'd like, I'd be happy to personally take you through our premium selection and answer any questions you have. Bradley's head snapped toward Daniel, his face twisting in anger. We're handling this. Shaq tilted his head. Are we? Bradley clenched his jaw. Then, his phone rang. The sharp electronic chime cut through the tension like a knife. Bradley snatched his phone out of his pocket and glanced at the screen. Then his entire body stiffened. Vanguard Private Jet's corporate office. His bosses. Bradley's hands started sweating. Because in this industry, one bad customer experience could cost you everything. And this wasn't just any customer. Shaq was about to make sure the whole company knew exactly who had just walked into their showroom. Bradley hesitated before answering, his mind racing. Did he come clean? Did he try to spin it? Before he could decide, the showroom doors swung open, and in walked Richard Langston, the CEO of Vanguard Private Jets himself. A hush fell over the room. Langston's sharp gaze swept over the scene, the frozen salesman, the stunned customers, Shaq leaning back like he owned the place. Then his eyes locked onto Bradley. And just like that, Bradley wasn't laughing anymore. The power dynamic has completely shifted. Shaq isn't just a customer, he's a power move away from completely destroying Bradley's career. And with the CEO now involved, things are about to get very, very interesting. Bradley had spent the last 20 minutes treating Shaq like an outsider, someone undeserving of their elite clientele. But now, as the doors of Vanguard private jets swung open, the energy in the showroom shifted. Outside, a convoy of luxury vehicles. A Rolls-Royce Phantom, a Bentley Bentayga, and a sleek black Maybach pulled up to the entrance. The hum of high-end engines purred like a declaration of power. Every head in the showroom turned. The door of the Rolls-Royce opened first. A sharply dressed woman in a navy blue pantsuit stepped out, her Louboutin heels clicking against the pavement. She adjusted her glasses and checked her phone, exuding the kind of authority that made people step aside without being asked. Then came two more men, both in tailored suits, carrying leather briefcases. One of them was instantly recognizable, Robert Langston, a high-profile financial advisor known for handling billionaires' assets. Bradley's smirk wavered. Something was wrong. And then, the Maybach's door opened. Shaq stepped out. But he wasn't the casual, hoodie-wearing man Bradley had dismissed minutes ago. Gone was the easygoing smile. Gone was the relaxed posture. Instead, he moved with the weight of someone who controlled boardrooms, built empires, and didn't waste time explaining himself. Bradley swallowed hard. "Wait, what?" he whispered under his breath. Daniel, the younger salesman who had tried to intervene earlier, slowly stepped back, sensing what was coming. Shaq walked toward the entrance, his team flanking him on either side. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The air in the showroom had shifted entirely. The same salespeople who had ignored him moments ago were now frozen in place, eyes wide, exchanging nervous glances. Bradley, his face slightly pale, forced a laugh. "Well, Mr. Shaq finally looked at him. Really looked at him. The silence stretched. Bradley cleared his throat, attempting to recover. "I didn't realize you were, serious about purchasing today." Shaq raised an eyebrow. The condescension from earlier was gone. Now Bradley's tone was eager, almost desperate. "You didn't realize?" Shaq repeated, his voice calm but sharp. Bradley opened his mouth to speak, but Shaq held up a hand. The room stilled. "Before you embarrass yourself further," Shaq said smoothly, "why don't you go ahead and look up my profile?" He nodded toward the receptionist, who had been watching everything with her mouth slightly open. The woman scrambled to type Shaq's name into the system. Seconds later, her eyes darted up to Bradley, panic flashing across her face. She slowly turned the screen toward him. Bradley leaned in, scanning the profile. Net worth: $1.7 billion, owner of Simmons Enterprises, multiple international businesses, private equity investments, real estate mogul. Interested in Gulfstream G700 purchase. Estimated budget, $80 million plus. Bradley's jaw clenched. His stomach sank. This man, the one he had mocked, humiliated, and dismissed, wasn't just a serious buyer. He was one of the biggest potential sales Vanguard had ever seen. Bradley forced a smile. "Mr. Simmons," he said, his tone completely changed. "I, apologize for any misunderstanding earlier. We'd love to offer you the full VIP experience." Shaq smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile that made it clear he was in control now. As if on cue, another man entered the showroom. William Hawthorne, the CEO of Vanguard Private Jets. Dressed in a three-piece suit, he carried the presence of a man who didn't tolerate incompetence. He spotted Shaq immediately, and his expression tightened. He already knew. Someone had called him. Bradley took a tiny step back. His face was sweating now. William strode toward them, shaking Shaq's hand firmly. "Mr. Simmons," he said, his voice smooth but tight with tension. "If I had known you were visiting today, I would have made sure you were greeted properly." Shaq tilted his head. "Is that so?" William's jaw tightened. "Bradley, would you mind explaining to me why one of the most influential business leaders in the world was treated like he didn't belong here?" Bradley stammered. There was a misunderstanding." Misunderstanding, Shaq echoed, eyes gleaming with amusement. That's an interesting word for what just happened. Bradley's mouth snapped shut. The other customers were now pretending not to watch, but their stolen glances made it clear. They were enjoying the show. Daniel, the junior salesman, suddenly stepped forward, nervously adjusting his tie. "Sir," he said carefully, addressing Shaq directly. "For what it's worth, I tried to step in earlier." Shaq turned his attention to him. "I noticed." Bradley shot Daniel a glare. Shaq glanced at William. "This your best guy?" he asked, nodding toward Bradley. William exhaled slowly. "He won't be for long." Bradley's face turned white. Shaq looked around the showroom, taking in the scene. The same people who had ignored him before were now shifting awkwardly, avoiding eye contact. Then, he made his decision. "I'll take the jet," Shaq said casually. "But not from him." Bradley flinched. Shaq turned to Daniel. "You're handling the sale." Daniel's eyes widened. Sir, You earned it," Shaq said simply. Bradley opened his mouth to protest, but William cut him off. "You're done here," the CEO said sharply. "Go clean out your office." Bradley's face crumpled in horror. "Wait, William turned to security. "Escort him out." Bradley's humiliation was now complete. Security stepped in, leading him toward the back. The same man who had laughed at Shaq, who had mocked his wealth, belittled his presence, and written him off as insignificant, was now walking out the door in disgrace. "And Shaq?" He smiled, shaking Daniel's hand. "Let's talk numbers." The crowd murmured in awe. The billionaire who had been underestimated, ignored, and insulted had just bought the most expensive jet in the showroom. And he had done it on his own terms. As Shaq and his team sat down to finalize the deal, a hush still lingered in the room. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about power. The kind that isn't given, the kind that is earned. And in that moment, everyone in the showroom learned an unforgettable lesson. Never judge a billionaire by his hoodie. The tension in the showroom thickens as the doors swing open, and Richard Vaughn, the formidable CEO of Vanguard Private Jets, strides in. His presence alone commands attention. Dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, his silver cufflinks gleaming under the showroom lights, he is the embodiment of power. He walks straight past Bradley and the other employees, locking eyes with Shaq. Without hesitation, Vaughn extends his hand. "Mr. Shaquille Simmons," he says, his tone firm but laced with controlled frustration. "I sincerely apologize for the treatment you've received today. This is not how Vanguard does business." Bradley, still standing awkwardly near the sales counter, swallows hard. Beads of sweat form at his temple. He realizes, a little too late, that this is no ordinary customer complaint. Shaq shakes Vaughn's hand, his expression unreadable. His calm demeanor only makes the moment more unsettling for everyone watching. He takes a step back and glances at the showroom staff, then back at Vaughn. "I came here today to buy a jet," Shaq says, his voice measured but sharp. "Instead, I was told to check the pre-owned section. I was ignored, dismissed, and humiliated. Your employees judged me before they even knew who I was." A hushed murmur runs through the showroom. Some employees exchanged nervous glances. Others, particularly Daniel, the salesman who had hesitated to side with Bradley, look away, clearly uncomfortable with what's unfolding. Vaughn's jaw tightens. He turns abruptly toward Bradley. "Bradley," Vaughn says, his voice deceptively calm. "Would you care to explain why a billionaire, one of the wealthiest men in the country, was treated like he didn't belong here?" Bradley stammers, fumbling for words. I didn't know who he was. I thought he was just..." "Just what?" Vaughn cuts him off, his gaze ice cold. "Not dressed the way you expected? Not the kind of customer you usually deal with?" Bradley looks down, his confidence crumbling under the weight of Vaughn's words. Shaq crosses his arms, letting Vaughn take over. He doesn't need to humiliate Bradley further. Bradley is doing that to himself. Vaughn exhales sharply, turning to the rest of the staff. "Let this be a lesson to everyone in this room. We don't judge customers by their clothes, their skin color, or our assumptions. We treat every single person with the same level of respect, or you don't work here." Shaq watches as the employees nod hurriedly, eager to distance themselves from Bradley's mistake. Bradley, on the other hand, sees his career flash before his eyes. "Sir, I didn't mean..." Vaughn holds up a hand, silencing him. "You'll be dealing with HR after this," he says, his voice like steel. "For now, you're dismissed." Bradley opens his mouth to protest but catches Shaq's gaze, calm but unshaken. There's no argument to be made. No coming back from this. Defeated, Bradley turns and walks out of the showroom, his career in shambles. Vaughn sighs and turns back to Shaq, his demeanor softening slightly. "I understand if you'd prefer to take your business elsewhere," he says. "But I want to make this right. Whatever jet you were looking for, it's yours. No red tape, no hassle. Just tell me what you need." Shaq tilts his head, considering. Then, with a slow smirk, he delivers the final blow, one that no one in the room saw coming. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Vaughn," Shaq says smoothly. "But I already made my decision." Vaughn frowns slightly. "And what decision is that?" Shaq slips his phone out of his pocket, taps on the screen a few times, and then looks Vaughn straight in the eye. "I just bought your biggest competitor." The room falls deathly silent. A few gasps echo among the staff. Daniel's mouth falls open. Vaughn's eyes widen slightly, but to his credit, he recovers quickly. Shaq continues, his voice unwavering. "I was looking at jets from multiple vendors before I came here. And after the way I was treated today, I made some calls. A deal that was in the works just closed." Vaughn inhales slowly, nodding, clearly piecing it together. "You bought Horizon Aviation?" Shaq nods once. "I did. Horizon Aviation, Vanguard's biggest and only real competition in the private jet industry. The two companies have been battling for dominance in the market for years." Vaughn exhales sharply, running a hand over his jaw. "Well," he says after a pause, "I can't say I blame you." Shaq pockets his phone and straightens. "No hard feelings, Mr. Vaughn. Business is business." Vaughn lets out a small chuckle, shaking his head. "You just pulled the biggest power move I've seen in a long time," he admits. "And I respect it." Shaq gives him a nod. Respect is everything. With that, Shaq turns and walks out of the showroom, his team following behind him. The staff is left stunned, processing everything that just happened. Vaughn watches Shaq leave, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Bradley really lost us more than just a sale today," he mutters under his breath. And as Shaq steps into his car, looking out at the city skyline, he knows one thing for sure. This wasn't just about buying a jet. It was about proving a point. And he made sure everyone heard it loud and clear. The moment Shaq leaves the showroom, the whispers start. Employees glance at each other, their expressions ranging from shock to panic. What just happened wasn't just a business transaction. It was a power shift. Richard Vaughn, the CEO of Vanguard Private Jets, stands in stunned silence. His biggest competitor, Horizon Aviation, had just been acquired by Shaq, right in front of his eyes. And the worst part? This wasn't just a lost sale. This was a public humiliation, a PR nightmare that could permanently damage Vanguard's reputation. His gaze snaps to Bradley, the man responsible for this disaster. Bradley, once smug and untouchable, now looks pale and visibly shaken. His hands fidget at his sides, his throat bobbing as he swallows hard. The weight of what just happened is finally sinking in. He just cost the company millions, maybe even billions. Vaughn exhales sharply and folds his arms, his expression unreadable. "Bradley," he says, his voice eerily calm. "You're fired." Bradley's eyes widen in panic. "Sir, no." Vaughn's voice is like a blade. "You humiliated one of the most powerful men in the world because you judged him based on appearance. You ignored a billionaire who was ready to spend money in my showroom. You single-handedly destroyed a major business deal." Bradley's face turns red, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Vaughn steps closer. And to make matters worse, Shaquille Simmons just announced his investment in Horizon Aviation, our biggest competitor. He lets the words sink in before delivering the final blow. "Congratulations, Bradley. You just made the dumbest mistake in Vanguard's history." The room is silent. Other employees shuffle awkwardly, desperate to avoid eye contact with their fallen coworker. Some of them had agreed with Bradley's treatment of Shaq earlier. Now, they want nothing to do with him. Bradley, shaking, tries to save himself. "Sir, I can fix this. I can—" "No." Vaughn cuts him off. "You're done here." Bradley's breath shudders. He looks around the room, hoping for someone to step in, to defend him. No one does. The same way Shaq had been ignored and dismissed, Bradley now finds himself standing alone. As Bradley stumbles toward the exit, defeated, Shaq's assistant returns to the showroom, but not for Bradley. She walks straight up to Daniel, the only salesman who had hesitated earlier, the one who had wanted to help, but had been silenced by Bradley. Daniel blinks in surprise. "Me?" Shaq's assistant smiles. "Mr. Simmons would like to offer you a position at Horizon Aviation, effective immediately." Gasps ripple through the room. Daniel's mouth drops open. "You're serious?" She nods. "He saw how you tried to step in earlier. He values integrity. You'd be a great fit on his team." Bradley, still standing near the door, watches this unfold in absolute horror. The same man he had mocked and belittled was now personally changing Daniel's life. Daniel glances at Vaughn, unsure. Vaughn, now caught in a battle he knows he can't win, sighs. "Take it, Daniel. We both know you deserve better than working for a company run by people like Bradley." That was all Daniel needed to hear. He nods, shaking the assistant's hand firmly. "Tell Mr. Simmons I accept." Bradley glares at him. "You're seriously leaving? You're just gonna throw away everything here?" Daniel shrugs. "Bradley, you made this place unbearable. I should have left a long time ago." The door slams shut behind Bradley. The tables have officially turned. Just when Vaughn thinks the storm is over, Shaq's assistant turns to him. "Oh, and one more thing," she says. Vaughn rubs his temples, already exhausted. "What now?" She pulls out her phone and taps the screen once. "Mr. Simmons just made a call to his legal team." Vaughn's head snaps up. "Legal team?" She nods, slipping her phone back into her pocket. Vanguard's discriminatory business practices, they're about to become very public. A chill runs down Vaughn's spine. Bradley getting fired was damage control. But this was disaster. He watches as the assistant gives him a polite nod and walks out of the showroom. Vaughn knows exactly what's coming next. A lawsuit, media coverage, and an investigation into Vanguard's hiring and sales practices. And worst of all, Shaq didn't even have to say a word. Within hours, Shaq's announcement about Horizon Aviation spreads like wildfire. Headlines explode across financial networks and social media. Shaquille Simmons exposes racism in luxury aviation. Fires back with a power move. Vanguard private jets under fire after billionaire humiliated in their showroom Horizon. Aviation stock skyrockets after Shaq's surprise acquisition. The fallout is immediate. Vanguard's stock starts plummeting. Investors panic, pulling out their money. Customers boycott the company, vowing never to do business with them again. Meanwhile, Horizon Aviation, now owned by Shaq, experiences a historic boom in sales. Within a week, Vanguard is scrambling to recover. Vaughn is forced into multiple public apologies, but it's too late. The damage is done. A few days later, Shaq posts a statement online. It's simple, direct, and impossible to ignore. It was never about a jet. It was about respect. And if you think success can protect you from discrimination, think again. That's why I bought the company that actually values people. That's where my money goes. The post goes viral within hours. People rally behind Shaq, praising him for standing up not just for himself, but for everyone who's ever been judged unfairly. And as for Bradley, he becomes a cautionary tale. The man who laughed at a billionaire is now blacklisted from the industry. No luxury aviation company will hire him. No dealership will take him. His arrogance, his disrespect, his prejudice, it cost him everything. Shaq didn't just buy a jet, he bought respect, and he made sure the world would never forget it. The showroom floor was eerily silent, the tension still hanging in the air like a storm that had just passed but left destruction in its wake. Employees stood frozen in place, their gazes shifting between Shaq and the exit. Moments ago, Bradley, the once arrogant salesman, had been fired in front of everyone. Shaq had turned the entire business upside down, not with anger, not with aggression, but with sheer power and control. He didn't just change the game, he burned the old rulebook. As he turned to leave, a voice, quiet yet filled with emotion, cut through the silence. "Sir, I just wanted to say thank you." Shaq stopped mid-step. Slowly, he turned toward the reception desk, where a young black employee stood, his hands clenched at his sides. His name tag read, Malcolm. The kid looked nervous, his eyes flickering toward the other employees as if afraid of being overheard. Then, lowering his voice, he continued. "You don't know how many times I've seen guys like Bradley treat people like that," Malcolm said, his voice tight with frustration. "People who deserved respect but never got it." He swallowed hard. "I wanted to speak up so many times, but I couldn't." Shaq studied him for a moment, his sharp gaze seeing past the fear and into something deeper. Hope. He took a step forward and placed a reassuring hand on Malcolm's shoulder. "You could," Shaq said simply. "You just weren't in a place where they had to listen." Malcolm's expression shifted. He had never thought of it that way. Shaq gave him a small, knowing smile. "But now?" He tilted his head slightly. "They're listening." Malcolm exhaled, and for the first time his shoulders loosened. He nodded, finally understanding the weight of what had just happened. Shaq squeezed his shoulder once before stepping away. And with that, he walked out. But the impact of what he did? That stayed. Within hours, the news exploded across every major outlet. Billionaire Shaquille Simmons humiliates racist salesman and buys his biggest competitor. Vanguard private jets under fire for discrimination. Stock drops 30% in 24 hours. Horizon Aviation soars as Shaq's new investment takes over the market. Social media erupted. Thousands of comments flooded in. "This is how you handle racism, with intelligence and power." Vanguard played themselves. Now they're watching their business burn. Shaq turned a disrespectful moment into a billion-dollar revenge plan. Legendary. Customers who had once been loyal to Vanguard turned on them in an instant. Influential figures in business and entertainment spoke out, calling for accountability, and corporate sponsors started pulling out. Meanwhile, Horizon Aviation, Shaq's new company, saw a record-breaking surge in high-profile clientele. People didn't just want luxury, they wanted to do business where they were valued. And Shaq? He made sure they had that option. As the chaos unfolded, Vanguard's CEO, Richard Vaughn, scrambled to control the damage. Within 24 hours, he issued a formal apology on behalf of the company. Within 48 hours, several employees were fired, including Bradley. Within 72 hours, Vaughn personally reached out to Shaq, requesting a private meeting to discuss making things right. Shaq? He declined. He didn't need an apology. He already won. A week later, Shaq arrived at Horizon Aviation's headquarters, where his new team greeted him like royalty. Among them, Daniel, the former Vanguard salesman who had shown him respect when no one else did. Waiting on the tarmac? A brand new, fully customized private jet. The kind Bradley once told him he couldn't afford. Shaq stepped inside, running a hand along the pristine leather seats. The customized details tailored exactly to his preference. His assistant handed him a folder. "The final paperwork is in. Horizon Aviation officially dominates the market." Shaq smirked. "And Vanguard?" She grinned, scrambling to stay afloat. Shaq leaned back in his seat, taking one last look out the window. Bradley had tried to shut the door in his face. Instead, Shaq bought the whole building. As the jet engines roared to life, he gave one final nod. This wasn't just about a sale. It was about respect, and he made sure everyone knew it. Shaq's actions weren't just personal, they were historic. He didn't just prove a point, he made a change. The ripples of that day spread across the industry. Other companies took notice. Policies were revised. Diversity initiatives were reevaluated. Salespeople thought twice before assuming who did or didn't belong in their showrooms. Malcolm, the young employee at Vanguard. He quit a week later. Horizon Aviation, Shaq's company, hired him immediately. Vanguard. They never recovered. Shaq didn't just win. He made sure the game would never be played the same way again. Power isn't just about wealth, it's about standing up when it matters. Shaq didn't just buy a jet. He exposed discrimination, flipped the script, and proved that respect isn't given, it's taken. How many times have you seen injustice and stayed silent? How many moments have passed where someone needed to be put in their place? Now it's your turn. Share this story. Speak up. Support businesses that value people over prejudice. Because when we stand together, we don't just change the game, we own it. Follow us for more stories that challenge, inspire, and rewrite the rules.